Okay, for 1-7, guys, we're going to talk about the midpoint, distance, and slope formulas. These are 3 formulas that you should have learned in Algebra 1 that we're going to carry on over. So, for writing the midpoint formula, the formula is we take our x and our other x, and then we divide by 2. Then we take our 2 y's, so y plus y all divided by 2. A lot of people tend to think that there's another sign here in the middle between these two things. There's not a sign there, so don't get that confused, all right? The next formula we're going to talk about is distance, which is the square root of x minus x squared plus y minus y squared, all right? And last, we have our slope formula, which is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Now, you'll notice that formula actually has the 2's and the 1's. Order really does matter on those things, so make sure that you pay attention when we get to slope, all right? So, let's do a problem here. It says, find the midpoint of AB. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to graph AB on the graph over here. It says A is at 1, 6, okay? Which means I'm going to go to the right 1, and then up 6, and put a dot right here, all right? The next one says that B is at 9, 6. So I'm going to go to the right 9 and up 6, which puts a dot right here. So then when I connect those, my line should look like that. Well, a little bit straighter than that, but you get the idea. So they want us to find the midpoint of that. Well, there's 2 ways we can do it. Let's use the formula first. Our midpoint formula says we're going to take x plus x and divide by 2, and then we're going to take y plus y and divide by 2. So, guys, you got to think of it this way. This is an x1 and a y1. This would be my x2 and y2. The 2's don't matter, but the x's and y's really matter. They've got to be xy, xy, okay? So when we're finding our midpoint here, our 2 x's are 1 plus 9 all divided by 2, and our 2 y's are going to be 6 plus 6 all divided by 2. So we just need to solve that. Well, 1 plus 9 is 10, so we get 10 divided by 2. 6 plus 6 is 12, so we get 12 divided by 2. So when we do 10 divided by 2, we get 5, and when we get 12 divided by 2, we get 6. So that's our midpoint. Now, you could also do this using a little bit of common sense as long as your line is straight. So let me go ahead and fix that here. And we could just say, all right, well, for this, we're going to move over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 spaces. So if I cut that in half, 1, 2, 3, 4, right there would be my midpoint, which is at 5, 6, which is exactly what we said. So you could do that as long as it's graphed, all right? All right. Our next one, we're going to do the distance between the 2 points. You'll see I already have it graphed over there. Our distance formula is x minus x squared plus y minus y squared. Now, we need to label our points again, x1, y1, x2, y2. Now again, you don't really need to label the 2's and 1's yet, but it's going to help you when we get to slope, okay? So let's plug all of this in. My 2 x's are 1 minus 9 squared, and my 2 y's are 6 minus 6 squared. 1 minus 9 is going to give us negative 8. Notice I'm still keeping it in parentheses with the square. 6 minus 6 is 0 squared. All right? So when we go to solve this, what is negative 8 squared? Well, a lot of people would say the answer is negative 64 because when you plug it into your calculator, you still need to use parentheses. Think of it this way. A negative and a negative make a positive. So if I square it and I square a negative, it becomes positive. So the answer would actually be a positive 64 plus 0 squared is 0. So we get the square root of 64 for our distance. Now, we always want to check to see if we can simplify this or give a decimal answer. In this case, if we take the square root of 64 in our calculator, we get the answer is 8. So the distance is 8. Now again, this is something you can do without using the formula as long as it's graph. You just count over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 spots. So that's the distance, all right? You can't do that if it's at a diagonal, but with these being straight across right now, you can still do that, all right? Next up, we need to find our slope. Our slope formula is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So this is one where it does matter. So x1, y1, x2, y2. All right? So for y2, we have a 6 over here. So we get 6 minus y1 is also a 6 over x2 is 9 minus x1 is 1. So if we clean that up a little bit, 6 minus 6 is 0. 9 minus 1 is 8. 0 divided by 8 is 0. So our slope would actually be 0, which means it doesn't go up or down at all, which you can see from this diagram is not going up at all. It's a straight line across. All right? Let's do this again here. Let's do this one for our next point. For this one, let's graph it again. So our first point is at 2, 2, so we put a dot here. Our next one is at 6, 2, so we go to the right 6 and up 2, so it puts a dot there. So again, we do have another horizontal line here, so not much is going to change in the way of doing these problems, but I'm not going to show you using the graph way. I'm actually going to show you using the formulas the rest of the way. If you want to use the graph way, that's really your call if you want to choose to do that. So our midpoint formula is x plus x all divided by 2 and y plus y all divided by 2. So when we label it, it's x1, y1 and x2, y2, right? So x's, we have a 2 and a 6, so that's what goes in. 2 plus 6 all divided by 2. And then for our y's, it's going to be 2 plus 2 all divided by 2. Well, 2 plus 6 gives me 8 all divided by 2. And then 2 plus 2 is 4 all divided by 2. 8 divided by 2 would then give us 4. 4 divided by 2 would give us 2, so that's our answer. Again, if you did it the graphing way, you could have verified that is the correct answer, all right? Next up, find the distance between point C and D here, all right? This one's already graphed for us, so let's go ahead and do our distance, which is the square root of x minus x squared plus y minus y squared. So we have x1, y1, x2, and y2. So our two x's are going to be 2 and 6 again. So 2 minus 6 squared plus my two y's are going to be 2 minus 2 squared. So 2 minus 6 gives us negative 4. Again, making sure that we keep that parenthesis around it for our calculator purpose. It's going to make it a lot easier. And then 2 minus 2 is 0 squared. So when we do negative 4 squared, we actually get a positive 16. And a 0 squared gives us 0. So we get the square root of 16. Put that in our calculator and we get 4. Again, you can just count the spaces to get that as well. All right? Next thing we're going to do is the slope again. So we get y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So we have x1, y1, x2, y2. All right? So for y2, we're going to put in 2. y1 is also 2. Over x2 is 6 minus x1, which is 2. So 2 minus 2 is 0. 6 minus 2 is 4. 0 divided by 4 is 0. So we get a slope of 0. Again, you can verify that in the fact of when you graph it, it doesn't go up or down at all. All right? For our next one here, these are going to be a little bit different. I'm not going to do the graph version on these because I want you to just get used to the formula. So for our midpoint, we are going to take x plus x all divided by 2. And then y plus y all divided by 2. Alright, so for this one, our two x's are 11. So 11 plus 11 all divided by 2. And then our y's are 9 plus 3 all divided by 2. 11 plus 11 is 22 divided by 2. 9 plus 3 would give us 12 divided by 2. 22 divided by 2 is 11. 12 divided by 2 is 6. So our midpoint is 11, 6. These can be decimals as well. That happens. Just you can either keep it as a fraction or a decimal. You might see one of those here coming up here in a minute. All right, distance formula. Square root of x minus x squared plus y minus y squared. All right? So our two x's are 11 minus 11 squared plus 9 minus 3 squared. 11 minus 11 gives us 0 squared. 9 minus 3 actually gives us a 6 squared. 0 squared is 0. 6 squared is 36. Add that together, you get the square root of 36, which gives us the answer of 6. Now, be careful when you're doing this. A lot of people forget the square roots somewhere along the way. Do not forget the square roots the entire way down, okay? Next up, we are going to do our slope. y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So let's actually label these this time. So x1, y1, x2, y2. All right? So when we do this, y2 is going to be 3. Minus y1 is 9 over x2 is 11. Minus x1 is also 11. So if I do 3 minus 9, I get negative 6. And then 11 minus 11 equals 0. Now, in this case, 0 is on the bottom. So when you do negative 6 divided by 0 in your calculator, it gives you an answer that says error. Whenever that happens, you are going to write undefined as your answer. All right? So whenever there's an error, you just write undefined. That'll count it as your answer. All right? Okay, for our next problem, they want you to find the midpoint, distance, and slope all on the same page, just combining them all in one, so that way it makes it a little bit easier to see. So we're going to call this x1 and y1, and this one x2 and y2. So for our midpoint, we take our two x's, which are 6 plus 9, all divided by 2. And then for our y's, we have 5 plus 2, all divided by 2. So when we take 6 plus 9 and add them together, we get 15, all divided by 2. And then when we take 5 plus 2, we would get 7, all divided by 2. Now, you can keep your answer this way because both of those are going to end up being decimals, or you can simplify them out to those decimals, and you would get 15 divided by 2 would give us 7.5, and 7 divided by 2 would give us 3.5. Either one of those answers would suffice. It's really up to you which one you prefer, all right? Now, for distance, we get the square root of, our two x's are 6 minus 9 squared, plus, and our two y's are 5 minus 2 squared. So when we do this, we get 6 minus 9 would give us a negative 3 squared, and 5 minus 2 would give us a positive 3 squared. So when we do negative 3 squared, we end up with a positive 9. And when we do 3 squared, we also end up with a positive 9, which gives us the square root of 18. Now, when you do this in your calculator, you are not going to get a whole number, which is fine. We're going to learn simplest radical form a little bit later on, but for right now, I want you to just give us it as the decimal form. So when you do this, you get the square root of 18 equals 4.2 when you round to the nearest tenth. So we'll say 4.2 would be our answer. Make sure that we're rounding that to the nearest tenth for right now. We'll talk about where to round to for each individual problem as they come along. All right. Next up, we have our slope. Our slope, our y2 is going to be 2 minus our y1 is 5 over our x2 is 9 minus our x1 is 6. So we do 2 minus 5 and we would get a negative 3. We do a 9 minus 6 and we get a positive 3. When you reduce that, you actually get a negative 1 or a negative 1 over 1. You'll see it more written as a negative 1 though, okay? So that's how you would find all three of those for those, all right? For our next question here, I want you guys to go ahead and try this one on your own. Pause it. When you've done with all three of them, go ahead and hit resume and I'll go over them with you. All right, now that you've had a chance to answer those, let's go ahead and solve for this. So we have x1, y1, and x2, y2, right? So for our first one, our two x's are 1 plus negative 3, all divided by 2. And then our y's are going to be 1 minus negative 3, also all divided by 2. So you should notice with this, by judging from it, you're going to end up getting the same answer for both of these. So 1 plus negative 3 is negative 2. So we get negative 2 over 2, and 1 plus negative 3 over here is also negative 2 over 2. So negative 2 divided by 2 is going to end up giving you a negative 1 and a negative 1. All right, for our distance, we get the square root of our two x's are 1 minus negative 3 squared plus 1 minus negative 3 squared. So when we take 1 minus negative 3, that's like saying minus negative means plus a positive. So 1 plus 3 would actually give us 4 squared plus 4 squared again because it's the same thing over there. So when we get 4 squared, we would get 16 plus 16. When you add those together, you would get the square root of 32. Now, what we need to do at that point is plug it into our calculator. When you do the square root of 32, let's round it to the nearest tenth. Now, when you do that, you'll notice that you actually get 5.65. Well, that 5 after the 6 is going to round it up to a 5.7 when we round to the nearest tenth. All right? And let's go ahead and move on to our slope. Our slope is y2 is going to be negative 3 minus y1 is 1. And then we also do the same thing for the next, which is x2 is negative 3 minus 1 again. Negative 3 minus 1 is negative 4. Negative 3 minus 1 is also negative 4. Therefore, our answer, when we take two negatives and divide it, becomes positive. So negative 4 divided by negative 4 is a positive 1. So 1 would be our slope for that. All right? Go ahead and try this one as well. Pause it. Go ahead and give it a shot. And then when you're ready, go ahead and hit resume. All right, now that you've had a chance to do that, let's go ahead and plug in our two x's here. So we get 1 plus 8 all divided by 2. And then our two y's, which are negative 1 plus negative 7 all divided by 2. So when we get 1 plus 8, we get 9 divided by 2. And then for our other one, negative 1 plus negative 7 would actually give us a negative 8 divided by 2. So 9 divided by 2, we can either keep that way or we could do a decimal form. I'm going to keep it that way for now. And then negative 8 divided by 2 would give us negative 4. So that's one answer that you can have. You could also, instead of having 9 over 2, you could have done that as 4.5. It's really your choice on which one you want to do, but a multiple choice, make sure you know both, okay? So, for distance formula, we take our two x's, which are 1 minus 8 squared, plus then our two y's are going to be negative 1 minus negative 7 squared. All right? So 1 minus 8 is going to give us negative 7 squared, plus, and then negative 1 minus negative 7 is actually going to give us a positive 6 squared. Because remember, minus negative means plus, so you're saying negative 1 plus 7 would give you that positive 6. So negative 7 squared would give us 49. 6 squared would give us 36, all right? Now, once we add 49 and 36 together, we get the square root of 85, all right? Now, to figure out our final answer for this, we need to go ahead and square root that in our calculators, and you would get 9.2. All right? Again, we'll learn simplest radical form a little bit down the road, so don't worry about that one too much. Just know decimals rounded to the nearest tenth. All right? All right. For slope, our y2 is negative 7 minus y1 is negative 1 over x2 is 8 minus x1 is 1. So negative 7 minus negative 1 is like saying negative 7 plus 1, so we get negative 6. 8 minus 1 is 7. Now, you'll notice this doesn't reduce. Therefore, our answer is going to look like that, but we do need to fix one thing. This negative that you get right here, actually we don't like it right there. So what we like to do is we like to put it out front of the entire problem. So the entire fraction is negative. It doesn't necessarily go at the top or the bottom, it goes out front. You can put it in one of those spots, but when we learn something a little bit later on, it's going to help you to write it out there. And that's when we get to parallel and perpendicular slopes. So when you see that, that's where you're really going to want to do that, okay? All right. Last problem here. Go ahead and do these three. Pause it, and then I'll have the answers on the board. If you need help with it, come see me the next day, and I can help you with it. But I'm just going to write the answers up, and then you have something to check with, okay? All right, so once you had a chance to do these, guys, go ahead and check this. You'll notice for the first one, you have 8 and 5 over 2, or you could have done it as 8 and 2.5. For the distance, you would have gotten 14.9 when you rounded the nearest tenth. And then for slope, you would have gotten 5 over 14. The thing you have to remember for slope, 2 negatives will always make a positive. So if negative 5 over negative 14 would not be the correct answer. It has to be 5 over 14 because those 2 negatives would end up making a positive. So if you have any questions about these three, come see me. We can get those worked out. Other than that, congratulations.